The camera focuses on a courtroom scene. A woman sits at the defendant's table, her disheveled appearance a stark contrast to her demeanor. Shatice Jackson, with her front hair awkwardly pulled and sticking out in all directions, isn't showing the solemn face you'd expect from someone facing capital murder charges. Instead, she's smirking, laughing. Her eyes dart around the courtroom as she mouths words to attendees. This is the face of a woman accused of murdering the father of her children on Easter Sunday. This is the face of someone who, just days earlier, allegedly pinned Mickese Bostic between her SUV and a house while their own children watched in horror from inside the vehicle. As Judge William Bell addresses her, Jackson's cavalier attitude doesn't waver. When asked about legal representation, she casually brags that her mother is bringing an attorney for her. No tears, no remorse, just a woman with disheveled hair and a disturbing smile, seemingly unbothered by the fact that she's facing the death penalty for a crime committed in front of her own children. What could drive someone to not only commit such a horrific act, but to show such callous disregard afterward? What happened on that Easter Sunday that turned a family celebration into a crime scene? And what will become of the children who witnessed their father's death at the hands of their mother? In this episode, we'll walk you through the shocking details of this case, from the escalating domestic dispute that led to gunfire, to the fatal decision to use a vehicle as a weapon, to the disturbing courtroom behavior that has left many questioning Jackson's mental state. Before we dive deeper, I want to know, what do you think about defendants who show no remorse in court? Have you ever witnessed someone laugh or smile when facing serious charges? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Crime Scene Exposed for more in-depth coverage of true crime cases. Mickese James Bostic was 27 years old when his life was cut tragically short. A Birmingham, Alabama resident, Mickese wasn't a high-profile figure. He was an ordinary man whose life was deeply intertwined with family. While public information about him is limited, what we do know paints a picture of a father whose relationship with Shatice Jackson had produced children, creating a permanent bond between them despite whatever troubles they faced. Shatice Jackson, 30, now sits behind bars facing capital murder charges. The mother of Mickese's children, Jackson had been involved in what police described as a volatile relationship with Bostic. The exact nature and history of their domestic issues haven't been fully disclosed to the public, but what is clear is that their relationship had reached a breaking point by Easter Sunday, 2025. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is the presence of children in this toxic dynamic. These innocent bystanders not only lost their father but witnessed the horrific circumstances of his death, and now face the prospect of losing their mother to the criminal justice system as well. The ripple effects of this tragedy will likely follow these children for the rest of their lives. Extended family members were also present during the fatal incident, with reports indicating that approximately 50 people were at the scene when emergency responders arrived. What began as a celebration, both Easter Sunday and a birthday party, devolved into chaos and grief for an entire family network. The relationship between Mickese and Shatice represents a tragic example of how domestic tensions can escalate to deadly violence. While we may never know every detail of their history together, the fatal outcome serves as a stark reminder of how quickly domestic disputes can turn deadly when they spiral out of control. April 20th, 2025, Easter Sunday. The home on Lisa Lane in Birmingham was filled with the sounds of celebration. Family members had gathered not just for the holiday, but also for a birthday party. Children were playing. Food was being shared. It should have been a day of joy and togetherness. But beneath the surface of this family gathering, tension was brewing between Mickese Bostic and Shatice Jackson. According to police reports, trouble had already surfaced earlier that day. A domestic disturbance call had brought officers to the residence, but at that time, no criminal action was taken. The officers left, perhaps believing the situation had been defused or lacked sufficient cause for arrest. As the day wore on, whatever disagreement existed between Mickese and Shatice continued to simmer. Witnesses would later report that the argument between the couple escalated throughout the day, punctuated by periods of apparent calm that gave no indication of the violence to come. What exactly they were arguing about remains unclear. Was it an ongoing issue in their relationship? A disagreement about the children? A jealousy-fueled dispute? Whatever the catalyst, the tension continued to build as day turned to evening. Then came the breaking point. As family members celebrated nearby, the argument between Mickese and Shatice erupted into something far more dangerous. Witnesses reported hearing multiple gunshots fired inside the house, a shocking escalation that transformed a verbal dispute into a potentially lethal situation. The sound of gunfire sent shockwaves through the gathering. A day meant for celebration had suddenly become dangerous. Family members who had come together to enjoy each other's company now found themselves in the midst of a domestic dispute turned deadly. Children who should have been enjoying Easter festivities were instead exposed to the terrifying sound of gunshots in their own home. In those chaotic moments after the gunfire, Mickese made a decision that likely seemed like the safest option at the time. He left the residence. Perhaps he was trying to de-escalate the situation. Perhaps he feared for his safety. Or perhaps he was simply trying to create space between himself and Shatice to allow tensions to cool. Whatever his reasoning, his exit from the house would prove to be his final moments of life. What happened next would transform this domestic dispute into a homicide case that would shock the Birmingham community. According to witness statements and police reports, Shatice Jackson made a decision that would forever alter multiple lives. She allegedly got into her SUV, with their children inside the vehicle, and drove toward Mickese. This wasn't a case of accidentally striking someone while trying to leave in a hurry. Witnesses described Jackson deliberately driving the vehicle at Mickese, ultimately pinning him between the SUV and the house. Let that sink in for a moment. Their children were inside the vehicle as it was used as a weapon against their father. Emergency responders arrived to find a chaotic scene. Approximately 50 people were present, many of them family members who had come for the Easter celebration and birthday party. The festive atmosphere had been shattered, replaced by screams, tears, and the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances. Despite efforts to save him, Mickese Bostic was pronounced dead at the scene. His life ended not by the gunshots fired earlier, but by being crushed between metal and brick while his children watched. What was going through Shatice Jackson's mind in those moments? Was this a calculated act of rage? An impulsive decision made in the heat of anger? Or something else entirely? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could drive someone to such an extreme act, especially with their own children present to witness it? The presence of those children in the vehicle would prove to be a critical factor in the legal proceedings that followed. Under Alabama law, committing murder in the presence of children is considered an aggravating factor, one that can elevate a murder charge to capital murder, carrying the possibility of the death penalty. Police detained Shatice Jackson at the scene. The woman who had moments earlier allegedly committed a violent act in full view of her children and extended family was taken into custody, beginning a legal process that continues to unfold.
Officers were updated that a female was trying to run over a male in a vehicle.
Investigators found 27-year-old Mickese James Bostic pinned between a vehicle and a house where a birthday party and Easter celebration had taken place.
The female suspect did in fact run over the male. He was trapped between the vehicle and a house.
Investigators say the incident stemmed from a domestic argument between Bostic and a woman he shares children with. A large crowd, including family members and children, witnessed the incident. It got so chaotic, Birmingham police had to call a max emergency for all officers to respond to the scene.
There's a large commotion. Family members were visibly upset because their loved one was just hit, and officers could not get the scene under control with East Precinct officers.
Under Alabama law, this deadly incident could mean serious charges if intent is determined.
Because those kids were there, this can now be a capital murder case. Because anytime in Alabama when there's a child that the couple shares in common that's under the age of 14, you now could be looking at capital murder.
She would do him so cruelly. It's so wrong. It's not fair. It's not right, but he's a good person. He's truly gonna be missed. You know, a long time ago they said there's a few good men left. He was one of them. He was gonna provide for his family, and he's gonna do the things that he needs to do for his family.
2 days after the fatal incident, on April 22, 2025, Shatice Jackson made her first court appearance before Judge William Bell. It was during this appearance that Jackson displayed the shocking behavior described at the beginning of our story, smirking, laughing, and mouthing words to people in the courtroom, her disheveled hair adding to the unsettling image of a woman seemingly unbothered by the gravity of her situation. When asked about legal representation, Jackson informed the judge that her mother was procuring an attorney on her behalf, though no specific attorney was named at that time. The court scheduled a follow-up hearing for April 30th to accommodate the attorney's notice of appearance. The charge against Jackson, capital murder, is the most serious homicide charge under Alabama law. What makes this case eligible for capital status is the presence of children during the commission of the crime. Alabama law specifies harsher penalties when violent crimes are committed in the presence of minors, recognizing the additional trauma inflicted on innocent witnesses. If convicted of capital murder, Jackson faces one of two possible sentences: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. However, legal experts note that convictions on lesser charges remain possible, such as non-capital murder or manslaughter, should evidence suggest mitigating factors. The key legal distinction in this case hinges on proving intent and the presence of aggravating factors. Prosecutors will need to demonstrate that Jackson acted with deliberate intent to kill Mickese Bostic rather than acting in the heat of passion or without premeditation. The timeline revealed by investigators, showing Jackson leaving the scene of the gunfire and then returning in the vehicle before the fatal act, could influence the determination of premeditation. As of the latest available information, Jackson's bond was denied, and she remained held without bond at the Birmingham City Jail. Additional court appearances were scheduled before other judges, including Judge Hudson, with further hearings anticipated to address motions, representation, and procedural matters. The legal process in capital cases is typically lengthy, with multiple pre-trial hearings, motions, and procedural steps before a trial date is set. As this case progresses through the system, the courts will weigh evidence, testimony, and legal arguments to determine Jackson's fate. The tragic death of Mickese Bostic serves as a sobering reminder of how quickly domestic disputes can escalate to deadly violence. While we don't know the full history of the relationship between Mickese and Shatice, this case highlights several warning signs and patterns common in domestic violence situations that turn fatal. Research consistently shows that domestic homicides rarely occur without warning. There are typically patterns of escalating conflict, previous incidents of violence or threats, and specific triggers that precede lethal violence. In this case, the fact that police had been called to the residence earlier that same day suggests an ongoing pattern of conflict that ultimately culminated in tragedy. One of the most disturbing aspects of this case is the impact on the children involved. Not only did they lose their father, but they witnessed his violent death at the hands of their mother. The trauma of witnessing such an event can have profound and lasting psychological effects. Children exposed to domestic homicide often experience post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and difficulties with trust and relationships throughout their lives. Mental health experts emphasize that children who witness domestic homicide require immediate and ongoing psychological support. They need safe, stable environments and therapeutic interventions to process their trauma and develop healthy coping mechanisms. The ripple effects of this single violent event will likely follow these children for decades to come. For communities grappling with domestic violence, this case underscores the critical importance of intervention resources. Domestic violence hotlines, emergency shelters, counseling services, and legal advocacy can provide essential support for those in volatile relationships. Law enforcement training in recognizing and responding to domestic violence situations is equally crucial, particularly in cases where early intervention might prevent escalation to homicide. Prevention strategies for cases like this include enhanced risk assessment tools for law enforcement responding to domestic disturbance calls, increased availability of emergency protective orders, community education about recognizing warning signs of potentially lethal domestic violence, support services for families experiencing conflict, particularly those with children, mental health and anger management resources for those struggling with violent impulses. The presence of children during domestic disputes adds an additional layer of urgency to intervention efforts. Children not only suffer trauma from witnessing violence, but may themselves become victims. In this case, the children in the vehicle were put at physical risk during the fatal incident, in addition to the psychological harm of witnessing their father's death. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE-7233. Trained advocates are available 24/7 to provide support, information, and referrals to local resources. As this case continues to move through the legal system, many questions remain unanswered. What exactly triggered the fatal escalation on Easter Sunday? What will happen to the children who witnessed this tragedy? And what sentence will Shatice Jackson ultimately face for her actions? What we do know is that a 27-year-old father lost his life in a shocking act of violence during what should have been a day of family celebration. We know that children witness trauma that no child should ever have to endure. And we know that a community is left grappling with the aftermath of a domestic dispute turned deadly. Mickese Bostic was more than just a victim in a headline. He was a father, a son, a member of his community. His life ended tragically, but remembering his humanity is essential as we discuss this case. Behind every crime statistic is a real person whose life mattered and whose loss creates ripples of grief through families and communities. The case of Mickese Bostic and Shatice Jackson reminds us of the volatile nature of domestic conflicts and the devastating consequences when they escalate to violence. It highlights the urgent need for effective intervention strategies, support resources, and community awareness to prevent similar tragedies. As this case proceeds through the courts, we'll continue to follow developments and provide updates. Justice for Mickese will ultimately be determined by the legal system, but the broader implications of this case extend far beyond the courtroom. I want to hear your thoughts on this case. What do you think justice should look like for Shatice Jackson? What more could be done to prevent domestic disputes from turning deadly? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this coverage informative, please consider subscribing to Crime Scene Exposed and sharing this video to raise awareness about domestic violence and its devastating impacts. By understanding these cases, perhaps we can work together toward a future with fewer such tragedies. Thank you for watching, and remember, behind every crime story are real people whose lives have been forever changed. Let's approach these discussions with the compassion and seriousness they deserve.